just to keep this moving along, if Johnny, if you're there, Johnny is from our Department of Natural Resources in South Carolina. He's done a lot of burning in the community in a state that burning is just kind of part of their culture.
Good deal.
All right. So thank you, Johnny. Well, please give us an introduction and jump right in.
Okay. Well, thank y'all so much for having me. I really enjoy burning, and I also enjoy talking about burning. So I'm almost exactly 2,000 miles due east of y'all, and I'm about 350 feet above sea level and about an hour from the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm in a place that gets about 50 inches of rainfall a year. Humidities hardly ever get below 20%, and so a lot different from some of the stuff y'all have. But then there's a lot of patterns and parallels that are the same. So when you look at the southeastern United States, there's a lot of ecosystems that burn, but the one that's iconic and one is a good way to define the Southeast and one that we center a lot of our burning on is the longleaf pine ecosystem, which used to stretch from Virginia to Texas, about 90 million acres, and it was the longleaf pine forest. And it was shaped by lightning before the Native Americans came here. You can see in the map, see the magenta reddish looking color. That's the point, the places of highest incidence of lightning strike in North America. So a lot of longleaf pine was shaped by fire from lightning. And then when the Native Americans came here, they quickly figured out by watching what was happening, how to burn the land to fit their specific needs, whether it was driving animals for hunting or clearing around the villages to kill the ticks and mosquitoes and chiggers and such as that, or to make the land pretty, make berry production and nut production good. There was a fellow, he was doing research in California, his name was Miller. He figured out about 60 different reasons that the Native Americans were burning the woods out there. And longleaf pine forest would have ranged from open savannas like these to more dense woodlands all the way to closed forest. The first Europeans that came into the Southeast, it was De Soto, and he came in 1540 into Tampa Bay in Florida, what later became Tampa Bay, and then crossed all over the Southeast and left a pretty good description of the flora and fauna as well as the people. The next wave of people that came in were my ancestors, the Celtic folks, the Crackers, the Scots and Irish, people who brought with them from the old world a tradition of herding animals and burning the woods to create good grazing practices. And like a lot of the nation, the railroad changed things big time. So the first logging that was done by hand, and it was mostly floating logs downstream. And so the logging that was going on didn't have that much of an impact on fire regimes. But when the railroad came through, everything became industrialized. And of course, things changed a lot. Areas that had burned every 1 to 3 years for thousands of years were all of a sudden had logging slash everywhere. And so the fires that had nurtured the land and been good for the land and been healthy for the land, all of a sudden became destructive. People back then it was a frontier mentality, and people really didn't think about what they were doing as far as harvesting timber and burning the woods. Burning was so much a part of the culture, it was hardly ever mentioned in the early literature. The whole nation took a real slam when it comes to wildland fire and prescribed burning when Bambi came out. And I think it was Pascal said, when emotions and reason compete, emotions almost always win. And Bambi's a good example of that. Turned a lot of people against fire and didn't do any good for folks like me who love to deer hunt either. Smokey Bear came after Bambi or about the same time. And part of Smokey's message is, always will be, always has been, right on the mark and super important. Nobody should carelessly or maliciously use fire, but that's not what Smokey said. He said all fire is bad. In the South, we had something extra that was hard on us, and that was the Dixie Crusaders. And y'all can look it up. It's a sad but fascinating story the federal government came into the South, and it was a crusade against prescribed burning and against the people of the South and against our culture. That was followed up by psychologists, a team of psychologists, anthropologists, and sociologists came into the South, led by Dr. John Shea, to study, and I'm not kidding you here, to study the psychopathology of people, of my ancestors that were burning the woods. They didn't come in here to look at the phenomenon of woods burning and figure out why people did it, whether it was good or bad. They came in here with the misconception that fire is an evil thing, and if people do it, they must be twisted in the head. And that was written up in the popular press as well as the scientific literature. While all that was going on, there was a wonderful gentleman, Herbert L. Stoddard. He didn't even have a high school education, and he was hired by some wealthy northern folks who bought big plantations to quail hunt. And so the federal government program of saying fire's bad was taking an impact on the South, and all the quail were disappearing. So these wealthy industrialists that bought these lands to quail hunt on, all their quail were disappearing. They hired Mr. Stoddard to figure out why, and he quickly figured out that it was because fire was taken out of the ecosystem. And so bobwhite quail are very much a fire-dependent species, and so many of our endangered species in the Southeast are also fire-dependent. And a lot of basically three places that we never lost our fire regime in the South was on the big quail plantations, on the Department of Defense military bases, which were not purposely burning at that time, but they were setting fires by accident with bombs going off. And they had fire-maintained ecosystems. They would pretty much just let the fires burn unless they were huge. And so the other place is the hillbillies and rednecks and crackers like my people that just never really listened to the federal government when the government said we ought to stop burning. Here's a way to look at fire in the Southland, and it can be applied in a lot of different places. You think about it as a three-sided pyramid. So public safety is always in our minds when we're lighting fires. You know, we want our fires, we think about where our smoke's going, where our fire's going. Can we control it? Do we have enough preparation in place? Do we have enough people and equipment to control the fire and prevent its spread? And then also thinking about when we burn, we remove fuels. And so one of the goals of prescribed burning is public safety, removing fuels and preventing catastrophic wildfires. The three sides of the pyramid can be thought of as culture, ecology, and economics. Economics, and each one of these things could be a 2-hour talk in themselves, but economics range from everything from protecting valuable timber and pine straw to homes and neighborhoods, and of course not having to fund wildfighting efforts if we can reduce some of the fuel loads with prescribed burning. And prescribed burning, of course, is not a panacea. It's not an end-all, be-all. It doesn't prevent wildfire, but it can sure help ameliorate and mitigate the impacts of it. And ecology ranges from everything from game animals to endangered species to wildflowers, anything out in nature. And then the cultural aspect. And every group of people that there ever lived in the South have burned the woods. The Native Americans, the Black folks brought with them from Africa a culture and heritage of prescribed burning and those traditions. The Celtic folks, and the Longleaf Alliance is a group that in about 1995 started trying to restore longleaf pine. And so longleaf went from about 90 million acres to about 3 million acres. So it was almost all gone as an ecosystem. It wasn't an endangered plant. The tree wasn't endangered, but the ecosystem was. But in the last 30 years, Longleaf Alliance and its partners have planted about 3 million acres. So they about doubled the acreage. And a big part of that is burning. You can't have a longleaf pine forest or savanna or woodland without fire. Taking fire out of the longleaf pine forest is like taking rain out of the rainforest or the tides out of the tidal marsh. This is Burner Bob. That's our version of Smokey Bear. And unlike Smokey Bear, Burner Bob loves fire and he promotes it. And he's a wonderful thing. Ashley's talk about invasive exotic species sadly hit home with me. We have huge problems with invasive exotics, everything from pigs that are disrupting our fuels to invasive plants, most of ours from Asia, and they interrupt our fire regimes. Sometimes the invasive plants, when we burn, they can't get a hold in an ecosystem, and so fire keeps them out, and that's wonderful. Other plants, just like Ashley mentioned, some of the ones from Africa, when we burn, we have to burn to maintain these ecosystems. But when we burn, certain invasive species spread like gangbusters. And so we have to use a lot of herbicides, which I prefer not to do, but we have to do it. Here's another pyramid, another way to look at wildland fire. In general, the more people that are in the landscape, the harder it is to burn. In general, the more fragmented the land is, the more sprawled out the people are, the harder it is to burn. And urbanism is the attitudes of people who move into rural areas from urban areas with the expectation of urban values, not wanting to breathe smoke, not wanting to smell a chicken house or see mud on the road from logging. And so these are things we're having to deal with. And all that is, of course, underlain by history. Here's a map that's very sobering to me. So you see the red in the middle of Georgia there. That's the largest urban area in the history of civilization. If you go by impervious surface as far as sprawl out on the landscape, and that's Atlanta. So Atlanta, the red is heavy housing development and pavement. And so that's 1940. So look at the red. That's 1970. You see Atlanta growing? That's 2000. And that's in a few years. And so we've got big challenges ahead of us to maintain our burning program. And we're only burning about probably a tenth of what we should be burning. So we don't have all the answers, and we're not getting it all done ourselves, but we do have some progress to show. One of the things that we need to get changed is we still see these signs on all of our federal lands. That one in the top right, that's on the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. I was out there a couple of years ago, and Smokey was supposed to have changed his message to say that wildfires are bad, and not say all forest fires are bad. But these signs still remain all over the country, and it doesn't. When forests burn, everyone loses. Prevent forest fires. These signs need to be changed. Prevent wildfires is a wonderful message, but for some reason, Smokey can't get around to changing the signs, even though it's probably one of the best funded PR campaigns in the history of society. We're getting fire out into the public eye. We have proclamations from the counties. We're working on county resolutions to get the county councils in the Southeast to promote prescribed burning, and we've been real successful for that. Most states have either a prescribed fire awareness week or month, and we're getting good signs on the roadside too, like that one at the bottom left from the Georgia Forestry Commission. Here's another way to look at wildland fire. Being multicultural, which I've mentioned, and pan-disciplinary, that is across disciplines, and intergenerational. You think about, this is Aldo Leopold, and he's shaped, there's a lot of us in the Southeast worship Aldo Leopold and follow his land ethic, and as y'all know, he developed a lot of his ideas in the Southwest in the 1910s, and they kind of gestated in his brain for 20 or 30 years and came out in this wonderful book, A Sand County Almanac, in 1949. And in that book, which is a book of hunting stories and very poetic words, he laid out his land ethic, in which he said the thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the land. And the land is the soils and waters, the plants and animals. And here's the key. And the land also includes people. In Sand County Almanac, that last little part about the land including people is not in there, but the book was published after he died. In the 1947 version of the land ethic, the part about people is in there. But multidisciplinary things. So Aldo Leopold wrote Game Management, his book on the science of wildlife management, in 1933. And very few wildlife biologists that I've met have even read it. It's top-notch science, and it was the founding book, the Bible of wildlife management. But just about everybody in conservation knows of if they haven't read, or if they, a lot of them love it too, a Sand County Almanac. And so it just gets to the point that science is wonderful, but when you're going to change perceptions and shift society, and the literature and poetry and the humanities are just as important, if not more so, than quantitative science. And the bobwhite quail is one of the things that lends itself to beautiful photographs as well as beautiful paintings. And some of the cool stuff we're doing down here is restoring cracker culture. If I could one day get on a horse and light fire off a horse, I'd be one of the happiest men alive. Hadn't done it yet. We're teaching landowners how to burn, getting them out on their land, and leading learning burns to restore the culture. And COVID didn't slow us down much. That's me on the right. So we were out burning. We said, well, we got to have some kind of protocol. So I grabbed the fire rake and I said, all right, as long as you stay a fire rake away from me, we'll be doing okay. We actually got a lot more work done during COVID, a lot more burning done, because we weren't sitting in meetings talking about how to get more burning done. Burner Bob White is engaging with kids. And it seems that the young ladies, the girls, the young women are the ones that gravitate most to prescribed burning. We're involving all the kids, and of course we watch them carefully. And I've had people say, well, that looks irresponsible. You got kids out there with dangerous things. It's like, well, those same kids have BB guns and 22 rifles and shotguns, and when they get 16 years old, we're going to give them a truck to drive. So it's fire is a dangerous thing, obviously, but it's a tool that can be used wisely by all ages, under the supervision, of course, of their adults. And so that's about all I had. But the thing about the intergenerational aspect of fire is, the way I look at my work as a conservationist and as a private landowner myself, restoring ecosystems for products, for lumber, for wood, for biodiversity, for endangered species, for hunting, for fishing, for pure beauty, and for the fun of burning it. All that's well and good, and I like to think it's a worthwhile thing and makes my existence worth what the state pays me to do it. But none of that really matters unless we tie it into the next generation, unless we get the young people out there doing it. Because when folks like me are gone, if I hadn't passed that along in a way that it'll be going on and on and on, I think I've probably failed. So fire in the Southeast, we don't have all the answers. We do have some good success stories, and hopefully, some of what we have done and a lot of the mistakes we've made, and we've made plenty, will be useful to people in other parts of the world and other cultures. And I look at fire as kind of something globally. I look at it like it was wildland fire was burning, and then society tried to put it out. Smokey Bear tried to put it out, and they put soil on it. They put wet leaves on it, and it wasn't smoking. There was no heat coming off of it, but there was a little ember down there, and it never went out. And what we're doing is we restore the culture of prescribed fire. Is we've pulled that dirt back, we've pulled those wet leaves back, we've exposed those embers, we've blown on it, gently breathed on the fire, let the wind and the sunshine reach the fuel, and now it's lighting up, it's flaming up, and it's going to illuminate our path into a more wonderful, bright, and prosperous tomorrow. Thanks so much. Share the flame.
Johnny, thank you so much for your time today. I think a lot of us had our eyes open to it right now. So I really appreciate what you're able to share with us about the fire culture history in South Carolina. Please stick with us. I'm going to call up Mark Brehl. Let's see if we can get his video on here. And Mark is a colleague of mine in Flagstaff. He's part of our Arizona Fire Adaptive Communities group. Spent several years working with the Flagstaff Fire Department and Firewise, Arizona Department of Fire and Fire Management, and is now with the American Forest Foundation. And so there it is. So Mark, if you can build upon what we just heard from Johnny and how some of those lessons or ideas translate to what your experience in Flagstaff and throughout the state, you're on board. It's your turn.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. Honored to be here today. And thanks, Johnny. Great to hear another Southern boy being from Tennessee. Don't quite sound like it after 25 years in Northern Arizona, but great to see what you're doing in the Southeast there. It's always amazing when I see how active other communities are. So, like Chris said, Mark Brehl. I work with the National Forest Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of our partner of the National Forest Service. And Chris asked me to talk a little bit about Flagstaff and the history of Flagstaff and the development of Flagstaff as a fire-adapted community, how that all occurred. My job is right now implementing a lot of forestry projects around the state. I have work going from the Mexico border all the way north of the peaks, anything from hand thinning and mastication up to ground-based logging and steep slope helicopter logging. Right now, a lot of that in Mexican spotted owl habitat. So for the last 2 months, since breeding season ended, I've been pretty heads down in the woods. And that's why I became a forester, because I wanted to be heads down in the woods. Not really my forte to get up and talk in front of big groups. But throughout my career over the last 20 years in forestry and fire management, it's become absolutely obvious that to get the job done, to build the support for what we do, and to do more in the future, this is needed. To get up here and talk to people, share our lessons learned, and work together as a team, build the partnerships and collaboratives that we need is really what's important. And that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about here in what happened in Flagstaff. And I know there's some folks here who are involved in this, and many people have been players. I'm just a dude with dirty boots, works in the woods, but I've been in forestry and fire in Northern Arizona for over 20 years. And so I've been able to watch what's happened. And I've worn a lot of hats and worked in different positions with multiple people on different types of projects. So I've gotten a pretty good feel for the different flavor of what's going on and how many people it really takes to move the needle here. So really the story of Flagstaff, the big sort of catalyst moment in Flagstaff's history towards forest restoration was in 1996. So that was just right about the time I was moving here, and I'd been in Virginia Tech studying forestry and knew about fire and had seen some fire in the Southeast and really didn't quite grasp the situation out west and didn't understand the magnitude of the problem and the severity of the fires and the intensity of the growth and rate of those fires year to year. Became pretty aware my first summer living in Flagstaff when there's multiple smoke plumes in any direction. And that's what happened in 1996. It was a big year across the West where thousands and hundreds of thousands of acres burned, and a pretty significant year if you look at the graphs and charts, which I didn't bring any. But that year, people in Flagstaff sort of stood around and realized that we have a big problem here. You could stand in town and you could look around and you could see smoke plumes in almost any direction. And that year we had the largest fire in the Coconino National Forest that surrounds Flagstaff. And 2 weeks later, that fire was surpassed by the next largest fire. Really got people's attention. And the forestry world with the Forest Service had already, understood what was going on and the benefits of prescribed fire and had been working in that direction. Coconino had already a pretty well-established fire program. And then we also had the Ecological Restoration Institute at the Northern Arizona University, and a lot of their research coming out that had supported the need for forest restoration, for thinning and prescribed fire to help bring back the natural structure, function, and process of our natural ecosystems, all sort of came together. We had the practitioners that were understood what needed to be done in the forest. We had the research academic side that had the supporting science behind that, very robust body of work there with many people. And then we had the concerned citizens that were scared because there's plumes of smoke everywhere. And then we had the government leadership at the time in the city and multiple levels in the city and the county and elsewhere. And everybody came together at the same time. So it was a catalyzing moment where we realized we have a problem. We're loving our trees to death. We need to do something about this. And at that time, we were much in a public mindset of preservation, that the best way to protect our woods is to do nothing. Preserve the woods, let nature sort it out. I think we all can agree that, with past management over the last 130 plus years, it's not natural in the forest. We do have nature in the forest, but the forest is not natural. So we realized coming together, we can build this partnership and create a plan. So at the time, this diverse stakeholder group of all kinds of people came together and formed what was called the Grand Canyon Forest Partnership at the time. That has since evolved into the Greater Flagstaff Forest Partnership. And so with that, we had government agencies, we had fire practitioners, we had Forest Service, we had other political leaders, and everybody had a role to play. Everybody has a role to play in helping move the needle. And that's what fire adapted communities are all about. The Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network developed around 2012. And we've been doing this for a long time, and many communities have been doing this for a long time. So it's really, this organic, collaborative momentum that needs to build. And it has to start small. The catalyzing moment is great. That can help kickstart it, but it's not always necessary. We had that in '96, got people concerned. But you start small, start visible, start very vocal, capitalize on your success, build on that success. And that's what's happened here in Flag. So '96, the city decided they had to take action themselves, and the municipal fire department formed a wildland fire management program that I was lucky enough to work for 11 years. And through that, we did a lot of forestry and fire management within the city and working with our partners. And then we also worked more regionally in with the Firewise Communities efforts, Firewise USA and the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and other groups throughout the state. And '96, the program formed. I think it was in '99 or 2000, the Flagstaff Fire Department did their first prescribed burn. And, prescribed burning was occurring in the National Forest, but doing it in town was something new. And for a municipal fire department to do that, that was, really new and caught a lot of people's attention. And so it was real strategic. Everything that has been done has been strategic with the plan and intent to build upon this. So that first burn was 4 acres. And it was right around the fire station, in between a fire station and a high school. And that 4 acres probably had 400 firefighters locked arms around it. So I think everybody had, their own sort of 5 square feet to stomp out when it was done. Had the media out there, we had the news, we had everybody out there. It was a big deal, made the paper, made Phoenix News, made the Flagstaff News. It was just a little burn, but it was big in the fact that a lot of people got to see it, and not just that day, but they got to see it day after day for the next several years or many years and see how it recovered and see the benefit and how that actually produced a healthier forest. And we've done that with a lot of our thinning projects too, and trying to promote those, make them visible for people. And it's worked really well with some of the cost share programs that various groups do. And you start with one neighborhood and get a couple of houses on one street. Next thing you know, they do the work and it looks great. And then their neighbors are calling you the next year, and then their neighbors, and it just sort of spreads like fire. So a lot of the work that's been done has been very incremental and intended to build upon the next step. So those were some of the early years. And since then, a lot has changed, and there's been a lot of growth and a lot of acceptance. We've kept a pretty vigilant, active outreach and education component of all the programs in Northern Arizona, and I think that's been crucial. We spent a lot of time planning projects and working with the forest and NEPA and the 180,000 acres around Flagstaff. And that's all done, but implementation's not. And people are transient. We still see a lot of people moving into town that we have to continually re-educate and bring them on board to help them understand what we're doing is to their benefit so that they can support what we tried to do in the future. And, you know, I've seen just incredible change and people's acceptance of what we're doing here. In my early career, I was on a fuels crew, and to date myself a little bit, we were hosting a visit for Governor Hall, so quite a while ago. She was coming out to look at one of our thinning projects, and some groups heard about that, and they were not happy with tree cutting, and we had a protest. And nails actually put into the trees, the only time I've experienced that on one of my projects. And they just didn't understand what we were trying to do was to help save the forest and restore natural structure and function and process. And since then, it's been converse. The difference is insane. We've really brought people on board, and I've had prescribed burns where I'm walking by with a drip torch in the black, and neighbors walk out with a tray of cookies and milk to give to the firefighters because they're thanking us for putting on the prescribed fire removal in the house. And I've also had projects where we have a feller buncher cutting along the fence of a neighborhood and see people climb out and cross the fence and come waving their arms at us, and you're like, oh boy, here they come, thinking we're going to get yelled at, and they just demand that we make sure we cut good behind their house and we don't miss it. So not the reaction I always expect. So a lot has been done, and you know, it's shown in a lot of the research. I'm not a social scientist or researcher, but I have paid attention to some of the work that's been done. And some of it's pretty telling. So Yan-Soo Kim and some others at NAU have done some studies in the past. I think they've redone it recently on market values. And some of that shows that a proper thin buffer of restored forest around a house or community increases market value by up to $50,000. And I think that was a $50,000 quote of about 15 years ago. So it has been inflated greatly. Julie Mueller, who worked at the Franke School of Business, professor, has done some surveys and studies on communities' willingness to pay for forest restoration activities. So what would somebody be willing to pay out of their pocket above their taxes and everything they're already paying to support active forest and fire management in their community for forest restoration and community protection objectives? And her studies show that people will pay like $5 a month per household. That's a lot of money for some people, you know, to voluntarily contribute. And in 2012, the Flagstaff, city of Flagstaff put a bond initiative on the ballot for $10 million of city money, city bond money, to do work outside, largely outside of city limits on federal property, on U.S. Forest Service land. And it was kind of unheard of for a municipality to pay for the work on federal land. But we realized that it was to our benefit to protect the forest around us because that protects our community that depends on the forest. And when that went to vote, the community voted by 74% to approve that $10 million bond to take citizens' money to do work on federal land. Because the people understood enough by this time that it's not about pointing fingers. You know, we can point fingers all day long, but when the mountain burns up and then the rains come and it washes down, I mean, you can still point fingers, but you're not going to get anywhere. So a lot has been done in Flag. There's still so much more to do. I don't feel like we can ever catch up. You know, we're still building upon those successes and trying to scale up and increase the pace and scale of our implementation of forest restoration, both mechanical forest treatments and prescribed fire. So,
thank you, Mark.
Yes, sir.
we're going to try to stay on schedule here. I'm going to open it up for some questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say a couple of quick lessons learned here. One, is just to share your lessons learned. You know, that's one thing that we have always tried to do. Share your lessons learned, so people don't have to learn on their own, and they can learn from your mistakes. Start small, partner up, start early, and just remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So go call it and go for questions.
Thank you. So for the next few minutes before we go to our break, while we've got Johnny with us and Ashley with us, any questions on this emerging fire threat that we have with non-native grasses and what we've already experienced and an idea of a fire culture? But thank you so much, Johnny and Mark, and as well as anything that came through on the chat box we might be able to address.
Mark just said it actually perfect. It's a start small, show successes. For the Globe Ranger District, at least, I just signed the NEPA decision last week to start actually implementing some prescribed fire on this district up towards the timber camp area. We're going to start small. It's going to, if we can burn 200 acres, which to us is, it's just a drop in the bucket on a 3 million acre forest. And, but I think that's it. I think that's what it looks like. I think it's sharp. It starts small. It gets people, it's everyone, it's all of us used to seeing some smoke in the air and adjusting our thought process to that. That's okay. Actually bring up wintertime. Is it completely natural for it to burn in the wintertime? Probably not. Is it a good, safe time to do it where we can start getting used to this idea rather than trying to burn chaparral in June? Yeah, I think that's probably something that is a good idea. That's probably where we'll start. That November, December, even January kind of time frame. We're into the spring burning season of April. March, February can still wet, but it's all about hitting those prescribed fire windows, what we call window, about making sure that you're actually following your burn plan, which, by the way, in case anybody has questions on that, I can do that. It's a whole other rabbit hole. Writing burn plans and being certified to do that and sign things. Well, I absolutely love Mark's example. What Flagstaff did, their first one, 4 acres. The whole bunch of firefighters on it. Just to show people you can do this. Here in the desert, we're lower here, like right around the edge of town. Obviously, we're not building pine. Grass, and chaparral, type ecosystems, things like that. If we wanted to start implementing prescribed fire in some of those places and doing it strategically, that's the way to start. It's the 4 acre burn. Yeah, and that's a huge piece of it too. Is that public education and outreach. I think it's going to our schools. I love the picture, especially the young ladies that Johnny was showing about lighting fire, because I can imagine my 8-year-old doing that pretty readily. Probably not in some days. I think that's a part of it. It's that community outreach piece. It's going to the schools, it's talking to people, it's going door to door. I remember, so I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in Michigan and Lake States, and there's not maybe quite as much as in the Southeast, but there's still a culture of fire there. I remember as a kid, Forest Service showing up at my house multiple times a year to just let us know there was going to be some smoke because they would burn blueberry marshes just down the road from our house. It was a normal thing. There was smoke and it was okay. So I think there's, but literally it was somebody from the Forest Service going door to door. I think that's all part of it. It's all that big piece, community outreach, and it may take a long time to really get comfortable with this idea. This is something that needs to be done, which I would argue that the mastication and mastication's probably bring up there's other tools. There is absolutely other tools. Mastication is certainly an option. Tends to be a little expensive, but doable. Hand thinning, weed whacking, all these things that can be done at a smaller scale. But I think to get us out of, out of where we're at, or just make us a more resilient community, it just goes back to that culture of accepting fire for something that I'm a giant. I actually hate smoky bear. It's probably not supposed to say that or something, but I hate Smokey's message. I do. I love the coil that is pro fire. I think the message of you shouldn't be out there lighting fires is great. I think it's the message that all fires are bad is truly.
I love Mark's talk, and the thing about starting with small groups of people. I think it was Margaret Mead said that never doubt that a small committed group of folks can change the world. Indeed, that's how everything has always been changed. It always starts with a group of people, and often they have to be brave and swim upstream and fight head fires to get where they're going. But yeah, that's the history of progress pretty much. And y'all have one of the, and of course y'all know it better than I do, somebody we follow and revere like Leopold out in Arizona, Stephen Pine. And at one of the International Association of Wildland Fire Conferences in Portland, 2017, he showed an image, and it was a fire triangle. And this particular one said that wildland fire in the future would be impacted by three things, the three legs of the triangle. One of them was policy, one of them was practice, and the other one was poetry. And he didn't mean poetry in the narrow sense of verse, but what he was talking about, I talked to him afterwards, was things that touch our heart, things that touch our emotions. And if you have that 4-acre burn or 1/4 acre burn, and you have a tiny little burn, and you have people out there, and they see the fire, they feel the heat, they smell the smoke, and maybe they eat a marshmallow that's cooked on the edge of the fire. You have all these all your emotions are being touched, and when you touch people's emotions through fire, through something that's so primordial, so ancient, so much a part of our psyche that shaped our brains even, when you touch people's hearts like that, they remember it. And when you do it year after year at the same time in the same place, no matter how small it is, just little symbolic fires like that, over time you create culture. That's exactly what culture is: time and place and people and practice. And it just has to be intergenerational. And culture is not just the past. It's not just things that have taken place in the past. It's what's going on today, and what goes on today, and what's not going on today, but we can start doing will be the culture of tomorrow.
I don't think we can do better than that. So thank you very much. We're going to go to our break now. We can thank our speakers.